Ancient Egypt is located in northern Africa along the banks of the Nile River. The Nile River flows into the Mediterranean Sea, giving Egypt easy access to trade with countries in that area. The Nile is the longest river in the world that flows north from the heart of Africa to the Mediterranean Sea. Its floodplain was an extensive oasis, a magnet for human, plant, and animal life. Humans were drawn there because they could grow crops and settle into permanent villages. The annual flooding of the Nile deposited nutrient-rich silt on the land, creating all the ingredients needed to support life and growth. The ancient Egyptians thought of Egypt as being divided into two types of land, the Black Land and the Red Land. The Black Land was a fertile land on the banks of the Nile. The ancient Egyptians used this land for growing their crops. This was the only land in ancient Egypt that was possible to be farmed because of the layer of rich soil. The Red Land was the barren desert that protected Egypt on two sides. These deserts separated ancient Egypt from neighboring countries and invading armies. When the armies did invade, the Egyptians had many weapons that they used. The principal weapon of the Egyptian army was the bow and arrow. The bow allowed for long-range damage and was even more effective with the introduction of metal arrowheads. Often the bows were not made in Egypt itself, but imported from the Middle East, as was the case with other modern weapons at the time. The bowmen were most commonly on foot or in chariots. Another important piece of machinery used for battle was the chariot. The Egyptians improved the design of the chariot by making it lighter, changing the position of the chariot's axle so that the driver would stand closer to it and covering parts of the axle with metal in order to reduce the friction between it and the wooden wheel hub. These changes lightened the load on the horses and greatly improved their performance. However, chariots were clumsy and prone to breakdowns, yet their use still continued for centuries. One of the most well-known Egyptian weapons was the khopesh. It was an early kind of sword that was short and had a bent blade used for slashing. There are many depictions of the gods handing the pharaoh this tool, also known as the weapon of victory. It quickly became part of the infantryman's basic equipment. Other weapons used during ancient Egypt were spears, battle axes, swords, the javelin, clubs, and maces. The most common form of transportation was simply walking, since most of the people of Egypt did not have the wealth to maintain horses or own boats. While the Egyptians did not specifically invent any new forms of transportation, boats, ships, and carts were used for trade. The natural resources and raw materials of ancient Egypt enabled the country to become one of the richest and most powerful civilizations of the ancient world. They were able to establish import and export trading with neighboring countries and beyond. Egypt imported gold, timber, bronze, olive oil, ebony, ivory, slaves, and the skins of wild animals. Egypt primarily exported grain, but also perfumes and oils. Ancient Egypt was the perfume manufacturing and trading center of the world. They were considered masters of the art of perfume making. The papyrus plant was a water reed once abundant in Egypt and used in making sheets of a type of paper. Egypt was the only country in the Mediterranean region where the papyrus plant grew, and the paper they produced strongly contributed to their exports. One of the most notable and lasting achievements of the ancient Egyptians are their pyramids. The size, design, and structure of the pyramids reveal the skill of these ancient builders. The pyramids were great monuments and tombs for the kings. They built the pyramids to protect the pharaoh's body. The pyramid was a symbol of hope because it would ensure the pharaoh's union with the gods. Egyptian architecture was not only beautiful but influential in Egypt and in other parts of the Mediterranean as well. In urban planning of ancient Egypt, the streets seem very confusing and complex, but if they are analyzed closely, they were carefully designed and created to maximize the flow of pedestrians moving together in and out of densely populated areas. Egyptian mathematicians were able to utilize the space to the best possible advantage. Egyptians are also noted for their sophisticated irrigation systems to help with the flooding of the Nile. Egyptian art was exceptionally lively with cheerful and colorful pictures that decorated not only the tombs but also in the palaces and everyday furnishings. The art of the Egyptians reflects every aspect of their lives. Inside the tombs there are drawings and scenes of everyday living, models of people and animals, glass figures and containers, and jewelry made from gold and semi-precious metal stones. The wall and pillar drawings are perhaps the best known. In these drawings, it can be seen that people are going about the everyday business of baking, fishing, boating, marketing, and meeting together in family groups. Such drawings were also used to help the deceased to live forever by giving them all of the instructions they would need as they met the gods on their way to eternal life. Sculptors were important artists in Egypt. Statues were made of kings, queens, scribes, animals, and gods and goddesses. Frequently, human and godlike attributes and symbols were combined. The elite Egyptians loved art and used it in their everyday lives, especially in their tombs when they were buried. The ancient Egyptians believed that it was important to record and communicate information about religion and government. Thus, they invented written scripts that could be used to record this information. The most famous of all Egyptian scripts is hieroglyphic. However, throughout 3,000 years of ancient Egyptian civilization, at least 3 other scripts were used for different purposes. Using these scripts, scribes were able to preserve the beliefs, history, and ideas of ancient Egypt in temple and tomb walls and on papyrus scrolls. Another important piece of literature is the Egyptian Book of the Dead. It is a collection of chapters made up of magic spells and formulas. It was written and illustrated on papyrus. It can be thought as the deceased's guidebook to a happy afterlife. The text was intended to be read by the deceased during their journey into the underworld. It enabled the deceased to overcome obstacles and not to lose their way. It did this by teaching passwords, giving clues, and revealing routes that would help the deceased to answer questions and navigate around hazards. It would grant the help and protection of the gods. Egyptian law was based on a common sense view of right and wrong, following the codes based on the concept of Ma'at. Ma'at represented truth, order, balance, and justice in the universe. This concept allowed that everyone, with the exception of slaves, should be viewed as equals under the law, regardless of wealth or social position. However, when punishment was carried out, often the entire family of the guilty suffered as well. Once again, the Egyptians used hieroglyphics as a way to keep records.